the cloud.
Great.
Okay. So we are in mid-discussion with Mary Beth McGee, our moderator, and Marisa Fife, our author, whose book we read, Woman in Brown.
Okay. So, as I said, Marisa has some very cool animal friends on her farm, and it's been fun. I was kind of hoping that one of the goats might be visiting today. She has little goats, and previous meetings with her, we've actually gotten to meet the little goats that were in the house. Are all the goats okay?
So everybody is my place is, I basically call it an animal resort because we take in foundlings. Sometimes we purchase some animals, but usually they kind of find us. So our most recent foundling is actually a really big Great Pyrenees dog that was a stray. Nobody wanted him, so we ended up taking him. He's a puppy. He weighs 100 pounds, and apparently he's not done growing yet. So.
Oh dear. Oh
But,
dear. Can we expect to see him in your next work?
Oh gosh, I love putting animals in stories. Ever since I was a kid, I have been drawn to them. I actually have a background and I have an agricultural degree when I was thinking about becoming a vet at one point. So I've done a lot of relief work in terms of like working at veterinary clinics, doing wildlife rehabilitation, and working with farm animals.
Wow.
Cool. Let's just jump right into the book because I am so tickled to introduce this book to folks. Betty and Mitch. I'm sorry, Betty and Cooper, rather. An interesting couple winding up together at the very first page.
Yep.
Who inspired Coop?
Oh gosh. I think all of my characters, and I think this might be the same for other writers, are drawn from personal experiences. So a lot of him came from me, oddly, and that's the same with Betty. And a lot of the work I've done with the public after I went through agricultural school, I was a nurse for a while, and I met a lot of people and heard a lot of stories out there. So I kind of was trying to get a very authentic type of person in a male character and a female character. And I know that it's not always the John Wayne image you see on TV. There's a lot of complexity there for both male and female characters.
I love that you have those imperfections in there, that they are very human. They are not cutouts. And that's very difficult for a writer to achieve sometimes. And yet you did it right out of the gate with your first book. And I just think that's fabulous. I'd like to invite the group, if you have any questions along the way, please use the chat or unmute yourself and ask. We'll be glad to let Marisa take your questions and feedback. But I'd like to invite her now to share a couple of pages of the book so that we can hear it in her voice.
Oh, sure. And I have the book right here. Can't see it because my background's clear. Sorry about that. It's the invisible book that I'm reading right now, but let me open that up.
Okay,
and
here we go.
Let's see. I'm just going to begin at the beginning, if you don't mind, because I had a little backstory about the introductory chapter, if you'd like.
Sure.
And Mary Beth, if you just want to yell at me when to stop, if that's all right, or do you just want me to do a few pages?
Just a couple of pages.
Okay.
We want to have folks to have time to talk about it with you.
All right. So we have The Woman in Brown, and we have 1938. The Midnight Ride was one of the oldest taverns in Boston. It was the type of place that lured tourists looking to marinate in the city's colonial past as they chowed down on fish and chips. It was also a good spot to meet someone you hadn't seen in a while. There were plenty of witnesses and lots of exits, just in case. Coop studied the tavern's patrons as Gershwin's Summertime flowed through the air, sung by a sultry-voiced beauty by the piano. The band was hot tonight, making bodies sway in the smoky room. A painting of Paul Revere hung over the fireplace, his laughing eyes seeming to approve of what the rebels had done to the colonies. A familiar, lovely face turned in Coop's direction. The look of pleasure when she saw him hit Coop like a sucker punch to the gut. He pushed past the crush at the bar and slid into her booth. The young woman studied him with her dark brown eyes, cigarette trembling in her elegant fingers. He set his battered hat on the seat, suddenly unsure what to say after all this time. He hesitated, then gave her a nod. Betty. As he stared, the delicate jaw tensed, her pink lips pulling down in a frown. She crushed her lucky strike into the onyx ashtray on the table between them. He could tell she'd been looking for a warmer greeting, as if the years they'd been apart hadn't meant anything. Really, darling, don't stare, she scolded, her soft voice prim. Her voice had always been like honey to his ears, the sound of it rich, soft, and delicious. Betty looked at him again, smiling with amusement, not quite hiding the pain from his distance. You're looking well? The server came, and Coop ordered. Betty brushed a lock of chestnut hair behind her ear, which was styled in glossy waves like Myrna Loy's. The tailored brown dress Betty wore cupped every one of her curves like a lover's hands. She smelled expensive. He breathed in the scent of lilies with something warmer and spicier underneath. A mink stole clung to her shoulders, and the coral-tinted nails of her half-moon manicure shone in the low light. Her clothes looked like they cost more than a month's pay from when Coop had been a police officer. And here he was, with newspaper lining the holes in his shoes and his belt cinched tight. He'd lost his job as a steelworker a few weeks ago. He'd been spending his time between park benches and soup lines while he looked for work. Somehow, Betty had found him, and she'd paid for Coop's train fare to Boston. What she wanted with a washed-up ex-con bum like him, Coop couldn't begin to guess. He shuffled his aching feet and looked away from her. Why'd you want to meet me here, Betty?
That's a great stopping point, Marissa. Thank you. So,
One of the things that I found, because as a writer, I find it hard for me to do, is the way that we learn the backstory very slowly over time. Because I kind of like want to spill it all out right in the beginning. Right? It is so hard. And I have to say that was one of the things I really admired was the how we learn bit by bit what their relationship was. Because at first, you don't really like her because you figure, she's just a heartbreaker, she just, and you really don't know her full story. So kudos on the way that you develop that. And also, the other piece that I admired was the suspense of, particularly when, it's her husband, right, who is looking for them. Violence is always a threat, and you're fearful, and you take us right to that point without, really making me want to just poke my eye out with a pencil, but just enough to keep the suspense of the story along. So I appreciated both those aspects of the story.
Thank you.
Well, I admired the way you set the picture for us, as in she took her lucky strike and did it in the onyx ashtray. Immediately I could see that happening in my mind. That was excellent. And you did that throughout your book.
Thank you. Yeah, I was fortunate as a kid to actually play with a lot of what we would call antiques, but at a time would call modern technology. And I've always been fascinated by antiques and how people used them and all that. So,
now, have you actually been to this tavern? Is it a real place?
So Boston is an old stomping ground of mine, and I grew up around Beantown, as we like to call it. But I've been in several New England style taverns around there. Paul Revere was always something that was hammered over our heads as kids. I always saw paintings of him, and I thought the old colonial paintings were kind of fun because they weren't just like flat photos in a lot of them. They were kind of like smirky in some of them. So you always wonder like, what was that person thinking while they were posing for that, or as the artist, did that painting. So I kind of made it, the tavern was a combination of the old Cheers Tavern and a very old 17th century tavern I once went in when I was a kid that was still, I think it's still operating today. So, but they kept all the period work, period structure intact.
Excellent. Now, another important aspect of your story is the vehicles, the
Yep.
cars, the trains.
Mm.
Tell us about your relationship with trains.
All right, so my first train ride as a child was on the Cog Railway that went out Mount Washington. That's an antique railroad. It's an old steam stack. And ever since then, I've kind of tried to pay attention to the type of vehicles that we use, because they've changed so much over the history of the human race. And I was also a huge Hercule Poirot fan when that show was out. I forget the actor's name, but he did a phenomenal job. And they always had the period vehicles and like the dress, the way that they wore clothing and the music they listened to. So I tried to incorporate a lot of that.
Which show was that?
It's I forget his name. He was it was the Hercule Poirot series, I think, that was like out in the 90s. And I'll have to look up the actor's name, but if you saw his face, you'd recognize him as.
But do you remember the name of the show?
Yeah, I think it was just Hercule Poirot was the name of the show. But
Okay, great. Well, I'm a fellow train fan. My grandfather worked for the Illinois Central Railroad, so trains have always been, it just struck me right away, the importance of the train there, because they mean so much to me as well.
And
Yes.
actually, that's on my bucket list to ride a train. I've never ridden a train.
Oh, you must
I'm jealous of all you guys who have.
yeah, they still
Oh.
have some great.
take a
great
train
trains
ride.
out
It's unreal.
Well, my
That's
father
Trans
worked for the
Canada.
railroad, the Southern Railroad in South Carolina. And one of my first things I remember is getting on a train and going for a ride with my parents, because we rode free everywhere.
Right.
Yes, wonderful.
But that was I love the way you did that in the book.
Thank you. Yeah, I think like trains had so much meaning in people's lives at that time.
Uh-huh.
They were really a huge transportation way, and they were the lifeline of this entire country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, let me open it up to the group. Any questions that you may have for Marisa?
Well, you mentioned automobiles, and then we talked about trains. So can you talk about automobiles a little bit?
Sure. I wouldn't call, like, I have family members in my family that I would say are official auto nerds. I'm still trying to completely learn everything, but I run things by them and say, am I doing this correctly? And they will correct me, which I'm very fortunate for, because I don't want to make a mistake. But again, with the idea of vintage things and antiques, I was also drawn to like old automobiles and, the original like Henry Ford Model T that came out. I've seen those in museums, and just the way autos have changed over time. We went from horses, being on foot, to horses, oxen, automobiles is kind of an interesting, story itself. And so I've always been kind of drawn to the 1930s style automobiles, though.
Okay, great. Anyone else?
I wondered, I haven't looked at your bio or your webpage recently. I did in the beginning, and it seemed to me that this story is a departure from the other things that you write.
Yes.
Okay, so you want to tell us about the other things that you write, but also then again, I want to know, do you have plans to write more in this style and in this genre, the noir?
Yeah, I pretty much what I like. So I like to write what I watch or read. And my favorites are usually mysteries, the thrillers, suspenses. I'm sorry, my background is making my hand invisible. I'm sorry about that. Mysteries, thrillers, suspenses, and Westerns, believe it or not. I love Westerns. And one of my favorite books is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. If you haven't read it, I know it's a long haul, but it's a great book. And then I delve into really goofy children's books. because I remember their impact on me as a kid, and I really just love how fun and free you can be with children's books. And then, and I'm so sorry, what was the second part of your question you were asking?
Well, do you plan to write more in the noir because you seem to have a real gift for it, or what is it that you're writing now maybe?
Yes, and so yes to the first part of that, to doing more stories in this style. I'm working on this might be more of like a straight up mystery, but kind of set in the same period. It's in the 30s that I'm hoping to release this year. It's a longer novella that's going to be a series. When I was reading a lot of mysteries, and they used to be published in magazines, so they would come out in series, like serial stories. So actually I'm planning on doing the whole thing in like short novellas or short stories as like a serial story, but just kind of in like a modern, we're in modern times now. So the whole
thought about publishing those in Vella?
and sorry?
Have you thought about publishing those short story series in Vella?
Kindle Vella?
Oh, Kindle Vella, gotcha.
Yeah.
I have to look into that a little more. I've heard about it, but I haven't dug too deep.
Yeah,
Everybody that I know that is writing for Vella is making a ton of money off of it, and my next book will be published in Vella.
Awesome. I will look into that. Thank you.
Well, I'm on Kindle Vella and I'm not making anything. So just want to put that out there.
Well, thank you for saying that. You're the first person I've met that said that.
Well, I don't publish on a regular basis. That's part of the problem. My Kindle Vella is The Adventures of Trixie, and I put one out there like maybe once every 2 months. So you got to be writing every week.
Well, I intend to finish the book first.
Yeah.
So it's all done, and then publish it a week at a time.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Great. Now, Marisa, you and I met through Sisters in Crime New Orleans.
Yes.
How did you get involved with Sisters in Crime, coming as you do from so many writing backgrounds?
Well, I've always been what I like to call myself a closet writer. And when I joined Sisters in Crimes, I was like, I've always heard you needed a writing community. Let me go see what this is about. So that's how I got into Sisters in Crimes. And previously I was like, I guess in my family we're very like practical people, and they always were kind of like, yeah, writing's not, something you really pursue as a profession. And so I kind of carried that narrative with me for a while. And then when the 2020 conundrum happened worldwide, I was like, you know what, I am just going to run with it, because I really always love doing this.
I'll be another hour.
Okay, call me back.
All right. Are you okay?
Bye.
Are you okay? Love you.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay.
I'm gonna mute some people.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I unmuted myself and my daughter called just as I was.
Okay.
Okay. Marisa, what influences did you call on for this book in particular? I know, as a reader, you're all over the place, but
yeah,
which books, which references led you to this sort of a story?
Let's see. I know at the time you mentioned that as a reader, we're kind of all over the place. As a person, I'm kind of all over the place. At the time, I was actually a travel nurse, going cross country on multiple trips. And one of the trips I did was from Boston to San Fran. So to pass the time, I was like, I'm going to write a kind of suspense style, Alfred Hitchcock style story that I wanted to do. So I started writing this in my car, actually, while I was visiting some of the places that Betty and Coop go to. And then in terms of research, I read through a lot of old, well, I won't say old, that is rude. I'll say a lot of papers from that time period I read through. And I had a couple old, I did that again, vintage Life magazines. Anytime, I think Betty in the story is actually holding a Vanity Fair issue that's in existence. You can look it up, and you can read through those pages too. So I was trying to get it down to like the page the character was actually looking at in that scene. And I know if I was telling my family this, they'd be like, "Oh, she's such a book nerd. Why would she do that?" But I actually had a lot of fun looking into that. So.
Well, sometimes being a research nerd is fun too,
Yes, that too.
getting deep into it. Now, I'm going to put you on the spot here.
All right.
Okay. If there were one thing about the book that you were going to change, what would you change? What would that thing be
I think
and why?
I am a sucker for like closure. So I think what I left open in this book was Betty and Coop's relationship. Although it was hinted at that they were kind of coming together a little bit more, I in my mind I was like, I always love a happy ending. I was like, oh, maybe one day they'll have a happy ending, but sometimes my writing goes in a different direction than that. So I think if I was to do a follow-up to this story, I would kind of explore what happens to them after this event. And then I think in terms of just writing craft itself, I sat on this story for a very, very, very long time, probably years, and I probably didn't need to sit on it for that long. So I think I would have gotten it out a little quicker, but.
Well, I'm so glad you did get it out because it is a wonderful story. And everyone that I've told about it has come back and thanked me for telling them about it, which is a nice thing. You know, you'd hate for people to come back and say, why did you tell me about that book? It was awful. No, they're all very glad that I told them about it and how much they enjoyed it.
Good. Thank you.
So why San Francisco, right? And the California scenes. Why San Francisco in particular?
Sometimes I have this thought that no good detective ever dies, and we'll still run into Humphrey Bogart playing Sam Spade in the North California area. And again, part of that was just like the traditional authors. I think it was, who was it? Gosh, my brain is not working today. The guy who wrote the Thin Man series, Dashiell Hammett. There we go.
Yes.
I love Dashiell Hammett. And so just between him, Humphrey Bogart, and having visited San Francisco myself personally, I decided that was going to be the end point. And there's a lot of like lure to San Francisco. I think if you read noir or detective stories, it seems to kind of, be in the backdrop of a lot of those type of stories.
Yeah, it is kind of a neat town for that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who designed your cover?
Oh, that I actually did myself. So I have.
Wow.
Thank you. And
So
I was
you're
trying
a
to get.
woman of many talents, huh?
Yes. You should have seen the newsletter she was doing for the New Orleans chapter. They were phenomenal.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yep.
Very talented lady.
Thank you. Again, it's the whole reading too many places and having curiosity in too many places. But
Well, the cover was great because, it looks exactly like what the story is. I mean, it matches the story perfectly.
thank you. Yeah, I was trying to get that, and I went around and showed it to a bunch of people before I put it online. I know there's there's still some little imperfections. Thank you, Mary Beth. But I just wanted something that kind of grabbed that mood of the story and the time period and what was going to happen.
Fantastic.
It really is a great cover.
Thank you.
One of the things that I really appreciated about it was that as violent as the theme is, you didn't give us a bloodbath. You didn't just pour stuff in our face in lieu of good storytelling. You gave us a great story and let us envision what the violence was without rubbing our nose in it. And I really enjoyed that because it means that slightly younger people can be introduced to it,
Right.
without having a problem. And I thought that was phenomenal.
Thank you.
Did you have a particular model for doing that?
If you look at a lot of the really well-known stories, like for instance, The Thin Man, or Dashiell Hammett's Red Harvest, I believe is the title, he goes into some really like violent scenarios, but he's very careful, or the publisher was very careful at the time to have them at a certain level of violence so that it didn't go, into like R-rated territory. And I think I could write that style of thing. However, in that gets a little too close to like real life for me, because I've worked in hospitals and as a nurse, and I've seen people in those scenarios where their bodies are very broken up. And there's just there was for me psychologically, I was like, I want to make sure there's the line here, and it's hard because that could get into a whole conversation about like how much violence is too violent, or how much detail is too much detail. And just, I don't know if this might be an old-fashioned opinion, but I was like, let's just kind of have a little bit of a curtain over the really gory details of it, and try to keep it at that sort of level of detail. But if that makes any sense. But
Well, and again, you used a level of violence, but a restrained level of violence that, yes, we knew these were bad people. We knew that there were bad things happening, but it wasn't in our face. And you didn't use a big bloody scene as an excuse for being lazy in your storytelling. And that was a great accomplishment. And I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I just think I know I like to think of myself as a very empathetic person, and I know when I've met people who have been in scenarios where it is a big bloody scene, usually your focus is not on the blood so much, but on helping that person survive that scenario too. So that could have been part of the reason why, at one point when they were in that scenario in the story, why she made the maneuvers she did, but didn't go into too many details.
Yeah, it was great choices. Great choices.
Thank you.
One of the things I'm left with and curious about it, because I do expect the two characters to maybe not live happily ever after, but at least get back together again. But nevertheless, what came to mind as you were talking about this violence was the fact that Coop went to prison, and as a policeman, that was a horrible experience, as prison is for everybody, but as particularly for a policeman. And so, I'm really curious about how well he could go forward, because he can't go back into police work. And well, maybe he could if he gets cleared, but he was a steel worker, and you just don't see this woman matched up with a steel worker quite,
Right.
although so I would be interested in future stories to get to know more about where each of these characters goes, one way, whether together or apart.
Yeah, I had some ideas in mind. I'll have to do a little more research before I go into them, but I had a couple ideas for Coop to have him. There's a path forward for him that I see in my mind, but we'll see if it's realistic.
Okay.
Okay. Marisa, I want you to tell folks about your newsletter. I am putting your website address in the chat for those who maybe haven't gotten to the end of the book yet.
Oh, gotcha. Thank you.
To see the information, but please tell them about your newsletter.
All right. So I have a newsletter I send out, I'll say quarterly at this point. I try not to, I'm one of those people that I'm always like, send out an email, but I don't want to send out too many emails. So I settled for quarterly. And that works for me too, because unfortunately with a place that has a lot of animals on it, I'm usually a very busy person. So the timeline works out well. But if you go to my website, there's a link where you can sign up for the newsletter. There will be a free book attached to that in the coming, I think by summertime, you should be able to get a free book if you download the newsletter link. And so.
Great. Thank you. And I have put the address in the chat. So if you haven't gotten to it, be sure and register for Marisa's newsletter. And I can tell you, she does a great job on newsletters.
Yeah, I had fun. I had a lot of fun doing the Sisters in Crime when we were doing it for New Orleans, and it's I don't get a lot of chance to do art, so that was kind of my fun art thing for each month.
Yeah. I feel like I'm monopolizing the conversation. I'd like to invite the rest of the group to participate. And if you've got a question for Marisa, please jump in, share it with us, because I promise she doesn't bite.
Marissa, it's Pat Carter.
Hi.
You'll appreciate the fact I have just dashed in from my manicured backyard, chasing two horses
Oh,
back
I
over
totally.
the fence. So needless to say, I don't have a picture. I'm one of those people who is interested in how in the world do you find time to write? Where do you write? And when do you write?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And so I have tried to write in the morning. I have tried to write during the day, and it tends not to work out so well because of things such as you mentioned, as chasing animals where they're supposed to be. And so I tend to write in the evening. I need to get better at setting a set time, but I tend to write when everything else for the day is done, like every activity chore you have to do is done. So I tend to write between, I'd say probably 8 and midnight. And if I could get that on a more solid schedule, I would. And then my weekends right now, fortunately, are free. So I do some writing on the weekends in the evening as well. Of course, when I say free and you have animals, you know it's probably like not really free, but I don't go to work on those days. So.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. Anyone else? Okay, well, I'll just keep monopolizing then. So, Marissa, one of the things that I really appreciated about the story, in addition to the way you handle the appropriate violence, you found such intriguing ways to give them a breather. And one of my favorites was that little farm they ended up on.
Oh yeah.
What made you have them stop at a farm?
I guess why a farm? Judging from the area of the country you're in, you'll see a lot of those big red barns with they often have like the quilt squares on them for decoration. And so that was in my mind. I've also been in very large barn structures like that, and I know how cozy they are on a very stormy winter day because I've also had the experience of working outside during blizzards and really heavy snowstorms. You know, when you're trying to do stuff and you go into the barn, you close that big slide door and it's so quiet inside. And you can just hear the animals pretty much munching around on their hay or whatever they're eating. And it's definitely a little oasis of safety in what could be like a very cold and, you know, lonely scenario, especially at night.
Okay. And the detail that you put into it with the borrowed quilt and everything was just, that was so cool. That was, I think falling into the details of the story helped me as a reader to fall completely into the story. And you gave me such a rich tapestry to work with that I was able to wrap up in it and be part in the story completely. And that's always a good thing when a writer can accomplish that, because there's so many distractions that come at us as we're trying to read. And I appreciated being able to get lost in the story.
Well, I'm glad that happened. I know a lot of reading I've done in terms of literature has been for escape, kind of that escapism. So I'm glad I was able to catch that.
Yeah, you did. You did a great job on it. The ending is, you know, as Sally mentioned, it's not quite the end of their story. It's the end of this story. And it's a very satisfactory ending, I must say. But it's not the end of Coop and Betty's story. Was that intentional, or were you prepping for a sequel at that time, or was that just the way that it worked out so perfectly? And
I think I wanted to give whoever was reading the story enough satisfaction that something had been closed off, like her horrible husband, that she had, that had finally come to an end and they were out of danger. But I did want to leave kind of like a writer foot in the door if I did want to go on and do a sequel to this story. So I was like, let's just leave it a little open, so we might be able to do that later.
Great. Great. I hoped that that was what it was, because it worked out so beautifully. I hope that it was intentional that you did it that way. Come on, folks. Now you must have questions for Marisa, and you must be tired of listening to me take over, but
I think I've asked just about all, I got all my questions in there, I believe. But I was wondering, in a story, like, first of all, this is a short story. So how many words was it as a short story?
Oh gosh.
It wasn't really it wasn't terribly short.
Yeah, it was almost verging on novella length. And
Yeah.
I think I just kind of got it under the radar there, but
Okay. Sometimes I wonder, did you have any scenes that you cut out because you didn't think that they would work in the book?
I think the biggest thing that I changed in this was, at first Coop was a much angrier person when he got out of prison. And I think I changed his timeline a little bit to have him like a little more mellowed out and thoughtful about the experience that he had, so that it wasn't so much of an angry person throughout the entire book. I think I'm not sure if people would have liked him as much as if he was that angry person, but it's like, in a way it's understandable he might have had that emotion, when he went through everything that he did and finally got out of prison. So I kind of mellowed his character a little bit. I think that's the biggest thing. And then I don't think I cut too many scenes. I think it was just mainly just overhauling his character was the biggest thing.
Yeah, because he was a very sympathetic character.
Yeah.
You liked him. Actually, like I said, I liked him more than her at the beginning of the story. So yeah, you got that. If that was your intention, you got it. You got it
received
right.
it.
Yeah, I think his backstory, I was trying to actually look at how people handle, big issues or traumatic issues that happen in their lives. And I was like, okay, he might have already passed that stage already when he meets Betty, and he's a little more cooled down from it. But I think he does have that in his background that he can probably remember or draw on later if I do, the sequel to this one.
If you were casting this as a movie, Marisa,
Ooh.
who would play Coop? Who would play Betty? And you have free reign. You don't have to worry about negotiating with their agents.
Yep. Gosh. Who would play Coop? That is such a hard one. I'm gonna, let's see, if we go with are we going with contemporary actors, or can we use like any actor?
Up to you. You have free reign.
All right. Well, I'd have to go with Humphrey Bogart for Coop because that's who I was thinking about, because I think he has that sort of humanity but tough guy part of his acting, and he unlike a lot of actors who are like 6 foot muscles, he's more of a normal average guy, and I kind of wanted to capture that in Coop. And for Betty, I'm trying to think of who I would put with her. I can't put a name on the actor, but I just want somebody who's very good at capturing like nuanced emotions, I guess. Somebody who can play that well on a screen. And I'm trying to think, I'm at a loss who that would be.
Well, I thought maybe Nora, with Nick and Nora. Who was that? What was her name? Who was the actress that played Nora in the Batman series? That's who I pictured in my mind when I was reading the story.
Yep. I think that was Myrna Loy, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, she would be.
Yes, Myrna Loy. Yes. Yeah, she would be a good one to go with Humphrey Bogart, wouldn't she?
Okay. And I have to say, I visualized Barbara Stanwyck.
Oh, yeah. That
You know,
would be
because
good
she can do
too.
that very vulnerable but tough inside
Yes, yeah.
so well.
Mhm.
And that's what I felt with Betty. She might be vulnerable inside, but she was tough. She
Yep.
had to be to survive what she had survived.
That's
Definitely.
true. Yes.
And
Mhm.
so I could see Barbara Stanwyck in that role.
Good idea.
And you know, with the modern technology that they have now, if you haven't read James Scott Bell's The Revenge of John Wayne, or John Wayne's Revenge, which way did he name it?
Oh, I've seen the cover, but I haven't read that one yet.
Yes, you've got to read it. It's a short. It's not a big drawn out thing. But with the technology that they're coming up with now, they're going to be able to do substitutions of, you know, oh, I want Humphrey Bogart at this age, and I want Barbara Stanwyck at this age, or Myrna Loy, or who, and put them together. And we'll throw a little Veronica Lake hair in there.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy what
Yeah.
they can do.
They'll be able to do it. But yeah, if you haven't had a chance to read that yet, you'll crack up. You truly will.
I'll check it out. Thank you.
But I think, I know I do when I'm writing, I have a visualization of a particular actor or actress in mind to help me keep the physical description and the characteristics straight. And I just wondered who you had in there in
Yeah.
mind. I kind of
That's actually-
suspected there was Bogey.
Yeah. I think that's a good way of doing it. I know when I write, I try to, I know it's weird. I think I put like the feelings forward first, and then like the physical description comes after me for writing. So like the way I write, it's like I put in kind of the emotions and the plot, you know, what's going to be happening and how people move. And then I'm like, okay, now what does this person really look like on the outside? And I think part of that is also how I write the characters, because I think people are like onions. You know, you have like the outer part that you see, and then you kind of start to dig a little bit, and you're like, oh, there's something else there, and then you just keep going if you're curious, you know. So not in a horrible way, but in like an, oh, I'm interested in this person, you know.
Yeah. So planter or pantser or plotter? I'll get it out in a minute.
Yes, I would say a bit of both. I think the fun part for me of writing is like seeing organically where something goes. And then at a point though, I'm like, wait a minute, does this make any sense to anybody who would ever read this? And then I go back and add in structure or make an outline that would help me add that structure in. And then I make little goals to like organically write to, if that makes sense. So if like I have an idea in mind, like the characters are going to get in a fist fight in this scene, I'm like, okay, so organically write like what happens up to that fist fight.
Now, have you ever had your characters go off in a different direction on you?
They do all sorts of things that I don't anticipate. So it depends on the story. This story, I think a lot of the backstory came as a surprise, because I'm basically asking myself a series of questions as I kind of write organically. Like, I'm like, all right, what type of job would Coop have gotten when he had just gotten out of jail and he can't work anywhere? And I was like, well, he'd probably end up in a steel mill or someplace like that, or be unemployed. So I was trying to think of like things like that, and then I would add that into his backstory, if that makes sense. So
Great.
Interesting.
Okay. I loved the incorporation of the boathouse.
Yeah.
In the final scene. Was that a real boathouse, or is that a research boathouse, or both?
that is a real boathouse, and it might not be physically located in California. It might be physically located in eastern Massachusetts by a by a very nice river. That's kind of like it's one of those saline rivers that kind of they move with the ocean tide, so it will go up and down. And but I've been inside that boathouse as well.
Excellent. And I think that's what gives your writing so much depth, is that you're basing it on real places and not, you know, not just kind of making something up out of thin air.
Yeah,
That
I think
helps.
I think I could have gone even into a little more, like whenever I don't know if anybody else does this, but whenever I reread a piece that I've done, I'm like, oh, I could have added that little touch of realism in there. But
Compulsive editor, yeah.
Yep.
I plead guilty. The hardest part is saying, okay, let it go.
Very
Get
true.
it out there, because you can edit till doomsday, or you can get the book out, one or the other.
True. Mhm.
Exactly. Well, Mary Beth, why don't you, we're nearing the end of the hour. Why don't you give us a little preview of what's coming up next time?
Okay. Next time. Boy, you thought I took over today. Wait till next time. Because we are looking at Death in the Daylilies.
Ah,
This was my first novel. It was a case of, I had been writing all my life. My mother kept saying, yeah, you write all this stuff and you're published in magazines and you're published in anthologies, but when are you going to have your name on the spine of a book yourself? This was that first book. Unfortunately, it took her death for me to find the time to sit down and do it, because I was caring for her the last 4.5 years of her life. So this book is dedicated to my mother and to the friends who dragged me out of the house and said, okay, you spent all that time taking care of her. It's time for you to take care of you. Let's go to the Hattiesburg Daylily driving tour. And as we walked through all those beds of daylilies, I suddenly saw a body. What would I do if I came around the corner of a shrub and found a body in a bed of daylilies? And that was the start of it. By the time we got home, it was a 45-minute ride. By the time we got home, I had the outline.
Whoa.
It blew me away. It's like, okay, Mama, I got it. I get the message. And it's set in the fictional Mississippi town of Cypress Point, Mississippi. I love
like that.
Cypress Point, Mississippi. And I love when people say, oh, where is Cypress Point, Mississippi, when I'm wearing one of my shirts, and I can tell them it's right here.
That is a
It
great.
is a fictional town, which is kind of a combination of several.
You know, I had a very similar experience. I was driving over to a friend's house during Christmas time, and I had the radio on, Christmas music, and all of a sudden, the entire story for Christmas Inc. just exploded in my head. I knew everything that was going to happen to it in an instant. I just had to write it down.
There you go.
Amazing.
Well, if you have not yet, and my apologies, Penn, because I know you've already read it, but if you have not yet read it, it is available on Amazon as a Kindle and in print. And I will be going in and reducing the price on the Kindle. It is, if you're a member of Prime, you can already read it for free. No, I'm sorry, you can't. That's the one of my books that you can't. But I'm going to reduce the price on it so that it will be a freebie coming up. So please go in. If you haven't had a chance to read it, give me a day or two to get that done. I didn't want to do it too far in advance because I was focused on Marissa's book, but take advantage and have fun with it. And if you like flowers, I think the best accolade that I've gotten from it was one of the officers of the American Humilocalis Society, which was the daylily organization, got in touch with me, and he said, well, I read it looking for mistakes, and other than one misplaced quotation mark on the
Excellent.
names of the flowers, you got it right. You did your research, you got it right. And that just meant the world to me, because I knew nothing about growing daylilies when I started. I just knew I liked them as flowers. But the more research I did, the more I saw where the story was going and what the motives were and what was going on.
Awesome.
So it meant a lot to me that I got it right, in his opinion. And they are now the American Daylily Society, because they said too many people didn't realize that Humilocalis was the scientific name for daylilies. after I went to all that trouble learning how to say it. But it was great fun writing it. And I'll tell you all about who my actors will be when we meet next month.
Great.
Could I just throw in one little announcement here?
Sure.
My new book, Back to Vietnam, is now available at Amazon. However, I'm doing a big book release on February 25th. And for 3 days, the book will be available on my friends and family discount for 99 cents.
Awesome.
Right.
So if you want to read that, wait till the 25th to buy it.
Okay,
Thank you,
Thank
Pat.
great.
Marisa, thank you so much. Mary Beth, thank you for a wonderful moderation. And yeah, we are so happy you could join us and fill us in on the ins and outs of the production, the writing.
Thank you.
So we look forward to seeing you all next month again. If you have
Thank
any
you.
questions, you know you can reach me, Sally@sallyhandley.com.
Thank you so much for having me here. Appreciate it.
Thanks
Okay.
for coming, Marissa. We appreciate it.
Bye
Okay.
all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great rest of the day.
Yes, enjoy.
Yes, enjoy.
So sorry, I was stuck in a meeting and just got out, so missed you.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. But hope to catch you next month.
Catch you next month.
Okay.